There's a poem called "And God Said If." It's not attributed to any author, but you can find the whole poem on the internet if you want to read it. I just wrote down the last couple stanzas of that poem, and these are they. If you had all power, then how would you learn to depend on me? If your life was perfect, then what would you need me for? Kind of a sobering thought, isn't it? To think about the fact that we need problems in our life to learn to rely on God. Most of us, right after we're baptized, we get this bravado. Maybe that's right. I'm going to conquer the world. I am so happy that I've been forgiven that I'm going to push all sin out of my life. I'm going to fix everything that's wrong. I'm going to go out and I'm going to work for the Lord. And Jesus has never seen anything like it's going to be with me helping. We kind of get that mentality in our mind that everything's going to be wonderful. And then there's this common thought in the world today that sin is kind of normal, right? It's just part of our lives. It's every day. It's kind of mundane. It's really not that big a deal. And I feel like after we've been trying to serve the Lord for a while and we've realized that we're not going to conquer the world and we struggle to conquer all of the sins in our life, that we almost let that thought invade our hearts. And we become kind of accepting of sin and start thinking, well, I'm better than most people, so I'm good enough. But biblically, we know, by reading about other people's lives, that there are times when people fall. Famous people fall. Really strong believers in the Lord fall. And sometimes just fall spectacularly, don't they? I thought for a while we might discuss back and forth between us some of the people we could think of in the Bible. But I was afraid that would take too much of your time. So just think about 2 or 3 instances with me. Cain killed Abel because God preferred Abel's sacrifice. God accepted Abel's worship and didn't accept Cain's. And so he murdered his own brother. How despicable can you be in your faith, in your living out of your faith? Maybe that's the worst one. Of course, we could talk about Judas, couldn't we? We could talk about David. All the power, all the glory. And he steals one of his best men's young wife. And then because he's about to get caught, he has him murdered so he doesn't get found out. And David was a person who desired to serve God. He had that thought in his heart. He intended to do what was right. How did he live with that? But the story we're going to talk about tonight is Peter. And I think I chose him because he relates to us so much. When I write these lessons now, it's difficult for me to not just get lost in thoughts of all the things that have happened in this group of people, in this building, with people that have been here but have moved on to other places or passed on at this point. And it feels to me like this is a reoccurring theme in our lives. That we come to a point where we're faced with our own sin. Maybe somebody's pointed it out to us. Maybe we figured it out from listening to a sermon. Maybe we knew it was already there, but we wouldn't listen to ourselves. Or maybe, like David, there was just some temptation threw in front of us, and we fell. And now we're brokenhearted, we're shattered, our life is a shambles. We're reduced to tears, we're in depression. We're weak. We can't think about anything else but our own failure. I appreciate that reading we had tonight, that reading of when Peter was in his bravado stage. When he stood with the others of the apostles and he was annoyed by what Jesus said about they would all leave him. And he said, if they all leave, I'm not leaving, Lord. I'm not going to fall. They can all fall away, I won't. I was personally condemned when I read that, studying for this lesson, because I remember a day when I stood in front of you and said that we had made up our minds, Susan and I, that if it got down to the 2 people left in this church, we were going to be the 2. Wasn't that me being Peter? And being so bold as to say, I can make it when the rest of you can't. And then he goes on and he says, even if I have to die with you, I know you said you're dying, Lord. If I have to die with you, I'm not falling. It isn't happening. He was told, wasn't he, that before the cock crows, before morning comes, you're going to deny me 3 times. Was Peter not serious in his conviction to serve the Lord? I think he was perfectly serious. I mean, when they went out into the garden to pray following that event, Peter is the one that pulled out his sword and chopped off the ear of one of the guys that wanted to arrest Jesus. He was serious about being on Jesus' side, wasn't he? More serious than I think I would be. And yet it happened. Listen to this from we read earlier in Matthew 26. I'm going to read a little more beginning in verse 69 from Matthew 26. This is when Jesus has been taken in and they're interviewing him. They're plotting how they're going to kill him. And this is what it says about Peter. Now Peter was standing outside in the courtyard, and a servant girl came up to him and said, you also were with Jesus the Galilean. But he denied it before them all, saying, I don't know what you mean. I'm guessing that if I were to poll you as a group, most of you would say you have never flat out denied that you know Jesus. I've come pretty close at times in my past. And so he went out to the entrance, and another servant girl saw him, and she said to the bystanders, this man was with Jesus of Nazareth. Now think about put yourself in that position. Jesus has been arrested. They're going to kill him. You already know that. And you're just standing out there trying to stay close enough to make good on your promise that you won't fall away. I don't know exactly what his thought process was. But somebody asks you and you say, no, I don't know him. I don't know him. And so they start telling other people, he's one of them. What do you do then? I'd be getting pretty scared. And I think Peter was. And he denied it with an oath. I do not know the man. He took an oath. And after a little while, the bystanders came up to him and said, certainly you too are one of them, for your accent betrays you. And he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, I do not know the man. And immediately the rooster crowed, and Peter remembered the saying of Jesus, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. I don't guess I've ever been driven to the point of cursing and swearing and saying, I do not know Jesus. I don't know who he is. I wondered when I was reading that what that sounded like, because even though Peter's been following Jesus around for 3 years, he was a sailor, wasn't he? You know what they say about sailors and swearing. Can you imagine when the rooster crowed, how Peter felt? There'd be the shame. I mean, he's been 3 solid years, 3.5 years, following Jesus around and listening to what he's teaching. And here he is swearing publicly and saying, I don't even know that guy. Most of us have in some way or another denied Jesus. But with swearing and taking oaths and publicly and denying that we know him, I doubt that any of us have come to that level. But we still have these things in our lives that despite the fact we've been going along, we've been trying to serve the Lord, and we've received blessings, and we've felt the joy, and we've been able to sing with fervor and worship and just love being here, and now we're in a spot where we don't really know what to do with our lives. And I would say on any given Sunday, there's probably somebody here that feels that way. So we begin to think then about the Lord's response. In Mark 16:7, there's this little event where the 3 ladies come to the tomb. It's on Sunday. Jesus has resurrected. The stone is rolled away, and they find that tomb empty. And an angel appears to them, and he says, go and tell the disciples I'm not there anymore, and tell Peter. Why would Jesus call out Peter? From what you know about the story from reading your Bible, wouldn't he have called out the one that he loves? That's in the scripture, and it wasn't Peter. Why does he call out Peter? I think there's a lesson for us when we have fallen away from the Lord. When we've disappointed the Lord and disappointed ourselves and we're having to live with it, it's important for us to realize he's still calling you. He still wants you back. And I don't know what you would do that would be more despicable than what Peter did. And he still wanted him back. So we need that comfort in our lives. And then we come to our scripture for this evening, John 21, beginning in verse 15. I'm going to read through this little account, and then I'd like for us to make some observations and see if we can apply it to our lives. When they had finished breakfast, this is the event where Peter had said, I'm going fishing. You remember that? We'll come back to that thought in a minute. But they were out there, they were fishing all night. They didn't get anything. Jesus has them cast out on the other side. They catch a bunch of fish. And then they come up on the shore and they have breakfast with him after the resurrection. What a cool event, right? To have lost him, to watch him die on the cross, and then to have him back and be able to sit down on the shore and have a shore lunch with him. That's impressive. So when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know I love you. And he said to him, feed my lambs. He said to him a second time, Simon, you son of John, do you love me? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to him, tend my sheep. And he said to him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. This he said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And saying this, he said to him, follow me. So let's go through this a step at a time and look at some of the events and see if we can learn some things from it. Simon was out fishing. He was a fisherman before Jesus called him, right? Can you think about the temptations that you have in your life when you're so discouraged with yourself and you feel like you've fallen away from the Lord and you know you're not what you ought to be and you know you're not right with Him? What do you do? Well, If you're a fisherman, you go fishing, right? You go back to what was comfortable before you started trying to serve the Lord. And so there's a real danger in our lives then that when a devastating sin overtakes us, that we just walk away and go back to what's comfortable and live there and just push all that other stuff out of our minds. I think possibly that's what Simon was doing. He was fishing. And we need to be careful of where we go when we're in that period of discouragement. After breakfast, I want you to notice how the Lord addresses Peter. Jesus called him Simon. You may not remember if you've not studied recently, but in chapter 1 and verse 42 of John, Jesus changed Simon's name. Remember that? He changed it to Peter. Now, I don't know what Simon means. I couldn't find an answer for that. But Peter means rock. And whether you're reading it, your translation may have it as Cephas or Peter. One of them's in Aramean. The other one's in Greek. And they both mean rock. So Jesus is kind of giving Peter a label, which if you think about at least the early part of what you read about, it doesn't really fit, does it? If you were going to describe this guy who flies off the handle, who says, I'll never give up, I'll die, I'll outlive all these guys, I can do what I want. If the word that comes to my mind is flake, not rock. But I think Jesus is predicting what he's going to do with Peter, what his life is going to become. So the story goes along for a while. Peter denies Jesus. Jesus is back to calling him Simon again. I don't know if other people thought about that when he said that or not. He is kind of quietly saying to Peter, you're back where you started. You're back where you were before you accepted the Lord, before you took up the cross and followed me. His denial of the Lord had changed his relationship with Jesus. And I think part of our recovery process from a devastating sin is to admit to ourselves, my sin has changed my relationship with the Lord. And I think he wants us to see that. And then he says to him, do you love me more than these? That more than these phrase is kind of a problem. People struggle and argue about what that means. I'll give you 3 possibilities. I won't tell you which one I think it is. And I won't be mad if you decide differently. I would like to hear your story, though, sometime on it. He might be saying, do you love me more than these other apostles? Do you love me more than you love them? That's a possibility for an explanation of it. He also might be saying, do you love me more than these things? You remember what a spectacular day that was. They had caught so many fish because of the Lord, their boat was about to sink. And so he said, look, Simon, I know you're a fisherman, and I know you love fishing, and that catch was the most spectacular catch of your whole life. Do you love me more than you love that? That's a possibility. Lots of people go with that explanation. And he also might be saying, do you love me more than these men love me? Now, on first glance, you might not think that's it. But remember the claim he made at the beginning of this story? He said, if they all leave you, I'm not leaving you. I think Jesus is putting that back in his face and saying, okay, do you love me more than they do? Are you staying when they don't? Because from where Jesus is standing, it doesn't look that way. He just denied him. I think it's important for us to think about when we compare ourselves with others that our judgment is skewed. I don't think the Lord cares if I'm a better Christian than Antonio is. I don't think that's what he's looking at. I think he's maybe looking at what he has given me, what potential I have, and what am I doing with it. And my opportunities may be completely different than Antonio's. He may expect way more out of him or way less because we're not in the same situation. And I think we make bad judgments sometimes when we compare ourselves with other people to see how good we're doing. To make this section a little more difficult to interpret, there are really two different kinds of love being talked about here. You don't read that in almost any English translation, but there are two different words. And so you're familiar with these two terms. Agapeo is that love that is the love of God. It's self-sacrificing. It always wants the best for the other person. It's a love of action. The other term that's used in this paragraph is phileo, which is more like a brotherly love. Robert and I get along. We both like fishing and hunting, and so we feel this camaraderie. Or maybe it's actually referring to your actual sibling. You feel this love for each other. So both of these are used in the story, and we're going to take a quick look at how. Jesus asks him, "Do you love me?" And that's the agape love, the high form of love. The I'll sacrifice anything to make sure you get what you need kind of love. And Peter answers with a different word. He answers with, "I'm your friend. I'm your brother." Not the higher form of love. And so Jesus asks him again, "Do you love me?" And again Peter says, "I'm your friend. I'm your brother." And the third time, Jesus just switches it on him and uses the word Peter's. "Okay, Peter, are you my friend? Do you have brotherly love for me?" Can you imagine how that stung? Peter's already answered him twice. "You know I love you. I wouldn't be here with you if I didn't love you." And Jesus is clearly pointing out, I want something more out of you. Are you even my friend? I mean, you denied me at the trial. Does that feel like a friend to you? Peter was grieved, and he said, "Lord, you know everything." Those words from Peter are so powerful because the Lord told him that he would deny him, and he didn't think he would. And that's got to just burn in his brain now that he knew I would deny him. When he said that, he knew I would do it. And I made a fool of myself saying, "I won't do that. I'm not going to deny you." This difficulty then of figuring out what Jesus is asking him brings to light that he's calling Peter to a higher level of love. If we think about how we would handle something like this, if one of you was heard publicly denouncing your belief in Jesus Christ and we were told about it, then Lauren and Dennis and I would have to come and ask you about that, wouldn't we? We couldn't just ignore that. But whatever the sin is that you've committed, more than likely we would show up and we would ask you about the sin. Is it true you beat your wife? Is it true that you denounced the Lord publicly? But he doesn't even ask him about his sin, does he? He asks him, "Do you love me?" There's the underlying motivation for serving the Lord, isn't it? And Peter, in thinking about that, can respond, "I love you," but not the way Jesus is asking it. I think Peter's changing the word on him because he recognizes the Lord is calling me to a higher level of love than I can say I'm committed to at this time. And so he couldn't look Jesus in the eyes and say, "I have agape love for you." I don't think he could do it. And the Lord knew if he could call you to a higher level of love, then doing the right thing would just follow, wouldn't it? If we all love the Lord the way we ought to love the Lord, then we would be obedient in the way that he wants us to be obedient. So what was the solution that Jesus came up with? Well, if you're going to go, Peter, to a higher level of love, I want you to feed my sheep. What has feeding his sheep got to do with denying him as the Lord and Savior? It's calling him to that level of love that Jesus dwells at, where he serves our needs. He dies on the cross so we can have what we need. And that's what he wants out of us when we're being called back from our sin. Come back and do what? Be a wonderful guy? Don't ever curse again? No. Come back and tend my sheep. Our service of the Lord exists in our service of each other, of our fellow man. It doesn't exist in us saying the right words when we're scared at a trial. It's not the solution I would have expected from Jesus if I was writing this story. That's part of the proof for the Bible, isn't it? The answers are not what we would write if we were writing it. He calls us to a higher level of love. But he has work for us to do. And it's in that work that we grow. We're so feelings driven in America today, aren't we? Well, I'm not going to do that because I don't feel like it. Do you ever hear those words? If you've raised teenagers, you've heard them a lot. But we're no better. We're just more careful with our words as adults. I don't feel like talking to Robert anymore, so I'm not going to talk to him anymore. I don't feel it. Well, the Lord is teaching us a principle here that in our behavior, our feelings become what they should be. And so we do the right thing, and our feelings will follow. I think it's also important that we notice that Jesus does not promise Peter wellness and safety and comfort when he returns. You heard that part at the end there about him saying, when you're old, your arms will be outstretched and somebody else will dress you and you'll go where you don't want to go. I used to puzzle over what that means until I realized if Peter stands with his arms outstretched, that's it. Peter dies on a cross too. One author has it that he dies upside down because at his own request. I don't know if that's true or not. I tried to confirm that and I wasn't convinced after I read. It's very limited evidence. But there's lots of evidence that he died on a cross. He died like Jesus. He died hanging on a cross. And Jesus was telling him, that's how you're going to die. It doesn't seem like the way to encourage somebody to recover from their sin, does it? But go back again to the beginning of the story. What was Peter's claim? Even if I have to die, I'll not fall. I'm not going to do it, Lord. And the Lord is saying, you will have strong enough faith that you can do that. And how do I know the Lord is saying that He'll have strong enough faith? Because He said, in dying in that way, you will glorify God. What glorifies God? For Peter to scream and cry and say, I denounce Christ, get me off of here. No, that doesn't glorify God. What glorifies God is for Peter to hang on that cross and, as we would say, take it like a man and not give up his faith in the Lord. So the Lord wants us back, but it might be difficult to do what it takes to please Him. Can you imagine what Peter was feeling in all of this? The things he had said that rang in his mind. Do you have things that ring in your mind that you've said and you wish you could take them back? I do. There doesn't seem to be any fixing it either. I can pray for forgiveness and for relief over and over, but I'm stuck with the things I said. And some of these lines had to ring in Peter's head. You will never wash my feet, Lord. I will never fall away, even if I must die. And then he denied Jesus 3 times. And it says, Jesus turned and looked at him. And so these are the thoughts then that Satan puts in your head. I can't face the Lord. Maybe he won't even take me back. I can't go out with the rest of the 12. I can't go meet with them in an upper room and pray because I'm too ashamed to face them. I'm no better than the ones that killed him. I could have defended him, and I just stood there and did that. Satan wants us to think these things. And he wants us to give up and walk away from the Lord and go where it's comfortable. So Peter has to face his own failings and place his trust completely in Jesus. And think about if you were there, what comes next? How do you move on from that breakfast on the beach and knowing you've disappointed the Savior? How do you move on from there? What comes next? Just a few days later on Pentecost, Peter stands face to face with the crowd that demanded the death of Jesus Christ. And he says these words, "Let all the house of Israel therefore know for certain that God has made him both Lord and Christ, this Jesus whom you crucified." Where did cowardly Peter go? Where did the guy that couldn't stand up at the trial and defend him go? He came through the fire and he determined to stick with the Lord. And now he has the boldness to stand up and say, I'm going to do it. I'm going to defend him. I'm going to condemn the people that had him killed. And he keeps on doing that, and he keeps on doing it until they had enough of it and they nailed him on a cross and let him die too. And he still didn't stop doing it. And that can be us. We can be the people who will defend the Lord if we'll stick with him. So the question is today, what can Christ do with my failure? He can do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. We can have the goal, we can have the intention of changing, but he can do with our lives things that we didn't see coming. He can make out of us what we cannot make out of ourselves. And so what does he want from me? Well, he wants me to say with Peter, Lord, you know all things. You know what I've done. You know what can't be, and you know what can be. And even if I declare to you that my love is in the very highest form possible, we'll know it's not true, but you can make it so. You can change me. He wants us to say with Peter, I love you, I will obey you. It doesn't make any sense to me, I can't figure it out, but I will obey you. And to say with Peter, I can't do this without you. I can't walk away because I don't know what to do if I walk away. And he wants us to do like he asked Peter to do. Care for the sheep. The elders here have traditionally and continually talked to members about the fact that the way to grow is to stop thinking about yourself and serve other people. And that's exactly what Jesus asked Peter to do. Stop thinking about yourself and get out and do something for somebody else. And he wants us to say with Peter, I'm going to trust you, Lord. And if it means I die, I'm going to do my best to trust you. Because I know I cannot live without you.